Señoras y señores, muy buenos días.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. We are about to start the 62nd Ordinary Meeting of the Common Market Council of Mercosur, and the following authorities are in attendance: the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Argentina, Santiago Cafiero, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Federative Republic of Brazil, Mayro Vieira, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Paraguay, Julio César Arriola, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Oriental Republic of Uruguay, Francisco Bustillo, and Mr. Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Plurinational State of Bolivia, Rogelio Maita. We would like to thank the following authorities for being part of this summit: the authorities of the state parties of Mercosur, national authorities, and special guests. Next, we are going to hear the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Argentina, Santiago Cafiero. Good morning, everyone. I would like to formally welcome the foreign ministers and ministers of the States Party and the Plurinational State of Bolivia, Roger, to this 62nd meeting of the Common Market Council of Mercosur. We are here in the province of Misiones, which is a beautiful province, and would like to thank also all the provincial authorities, particularly the governor of Misiones, who has contributed so that we can meet together in the summit today. We're going to be working with an agenda that we're going to put forward for your consideration in a few minutes. But first and foremost, I would like to highlight the spirit of this summit, the spirit of this meeting, which is to continue fostering Latin American integration, our integration, the Mercosur integration, South American integration, which definitely and finally is or means to continue giving opportunities in this very uncertain world, opportunities to this very faraway land, our land, the land of the South, of South America, of Mercosur. And we need to build a basis from there for the development of our peoples. So this is ultimately what we're going to be discussing here today. How? We have different perspectives, we have diverse perspectives. So how do we create the necessary mechanisms for a harmonious development of our region and for a harmonious development of our bloc? And in this way, I put forward for consideration the agenda so that we can start with this work.
for the state of reference. Thank you very much, dear Secretariat Cecilia, for the report. I would like to thank your work to you and the team that was just highlighted. This is a continuity. We were working in this first semester in the pro-tempore presidency that tomorrow will be handed over to Brazil. And what happens with these PTPs is that we resume former work and try to foster it and include our diversities and viewpoints and all the topics to be considered in these conversations. During 6 months, of course, we cannot start and conclude matters that have to do with our own way of relating, our own way of integrating, and our own integration process of Mercosur. But what we can do, based on our work, from all our technical areas and the willing and intentions of all the countries members of Mercosur, is to have that decision, that political determination, and improve, extend these integration spaces within the region. This uncertain time, this global uncertain time, this redefinition time, conceived as the globalization when the first steps of Mercosur were first made. Well, today is a different world. It's a very different world that has different priorities and different opportunities as well. Priorities because we have to trust together in the work of our member states to move forward in the same direction, in the same logics. Globalization, as we knew it, is not a reality anymore. Today, globality of regions is the one that is moving forward. And in these uncertain times, not only due to the war and the invasion by Russia to Ukraine, that brought about an extra layer of complexity to a world that was already uncertain, that had gone through a crisis of value chain accentuated by the pandemic, which at the same time had been witness of this multilateralism and its own crisis, this multilateralism at a global level. And the backstage of such organizations, not just the organizations of international loans, not the financial structure itself, but also the methods, the fora, this integration, this multicultural exchange. It's all under debate now. And before this debate and this uncertainty, it is Mercosur that gathers again, that meets again in person, which I think is very powerful. We all know that during the pandemic and its Zoom meetings was a lot more complicated. It was less empathetic, and we reached conclusions that were less robust. However, today we will have the presence of 4 presidents, heads of state of the member states in the past 4 years. And this is the result of our work and the commitment of each of the countries, but also the work and the commitment of each of the teams represented here today. And that is why in this uncertainty and these uncertain times and opportunity times, we have to strengthen ourselves as a bloc. We will probably have different opinions and different viewpoints, of course, but all of them are welcome, and all of them are worth our respect. And that's why PTPs, pro-temporary presidencies, every 6 months, create opportunities to translate into priorities that each of the states creates and thinks as opportunities and priorities. Because in this uncertain world, the challenge of closing the development gap that we have as a region is based on more integration and not less integration. We will not achieve much if we disintegrate, if we isolate ourselves. We need more integration. Just a few figures. When we see the reaction of Mercosur's trade last year, we managed to have record numbers in Mercosur. We've grown at 48% between 2019 and 2022 regarding foreign trade, more than $750 billion. That is what Mercosur grew in terms of exports. And we saw even more growth after the pandemic based on the intra-zone trade. That is the type of trade that allows SMEs to have their own first bonds with foreign trade. So we see how Mercosur continues to be the most important integration tool of our country. And that's why we're here, and that's why we'll move ahead with our agenda. As it was highlighted before, we continued the work aimed at the drafting of a new origin regime for our bloc, together with the changes that we've already made to the common foreign tariff during the Paraguay PTP, that will growth so that the bloc can benefit from the reconfiguration of value chains and the transition to technologies with less impact on the environment, together with the conclusions of the 8th round of service trade, in which we continued working this semester and became key tools for the strengthening of our integration process and the articulation with a world that is transforming itself. I ratify then the disposition of Argentina to move forward during the second semester of this year, because it has to do with matters where the work done makes us very close to specific results. As I said before, these are topics that start and need continuity. They come from before, from other presidencies, and that is why it's so important to think of the integration and its processes as policies of state. We've also started with the ad hoc group on trade sustainable development. This was created last year as a proposal and under the leadership of Uruguay. Within this field, we started the coordination work of our national positions, which will help us react jointly before this green protectionism that is really anchored in a serious preoccupation that really entails, in practice, protection of production and producers of developed countries that affect trade in general, but mainly those countries like ours, countries that produce food and commodities, which are sectors that are key to our economies. During this semester as well, we had the meeting of energy ministers in the bloc, as we heard before, which had not been held since December 2021, when under the presidency of Brazil, after a decade, we resumed back in 2021 these meetings that were put to a halt. It's key to talk about energy, not just the opportunities of our countries, but also the energetic debate is part of a geopolitical autonomous debate. We also continued with the Mercosur's Business Forum. We focused on the 5 topics that Cecilia highlighted: value chains in the biotechnological sector, transition to sustainable mobility in the automobile sector, the production of medical equipment, and the development of drugs for medical use, the integration of publicity services in the audiovisual sector, and also we worked on gender perspective and the role of women entrepreneurs in foreign trade of our bloc. In all these sectors and with representation of the 4 countries, businessmen and women and their associations had a conversation and presented conclusions and recommendations before decision-making bodies and technical forum of Mercosur. These are key, not just for the debate, but also for the creation and generation of public policies based on the same spirit, and convinced of the key role that this participation of civil society has in the construction and consolidation of our integration process. We strengthen the conversation, the permanent conversation with the Economic and Social Consultative Council. It is a representative key situation under the Oro Preto Protocol that promotes active participation of our citizens, our workers, men and female, men and women, business people, that have to be very close for a design of an inclusive Mercosur. We included the program, this seal of good design of Mercosur, aiming at the development of the creativity of our entrepreneurs. When talking about the digital agenda, we will sign the Mercosur Agreement on Cybersecurity Cooperation, which will allow our national agencies with a higher level of coordination be able to face cybernetic threats that can overcome our national borders. This tool will be added to other tools such as digital signature, e-commerce, the elimination of roaming charges in communications on mobile phones. During this semester, we also called upon the working group on the accession of Bolivia, which had not met since February 2019, and focused on 3 working lines: the inclusion of Mercosur rules to Bolivia's legislation, the inclusion of trade instruments such as the common external tariff, and the accession of Bolivia to the Mercosur agreement with third-party countries or group of countries. When talking about external negotiations, and we've been asked about this on a permanent basis, our focus was put this first semester on moving ahead or forward with the EU-Mercosur Association Agreement. And this is where I'd like to stop for a minute, because this was part of the task that we've imposed on ourselves as PTP to bring light with technical information and documents, precise information, that there is no ideological speech, and it doesn't have to do with our emotions, but rather with objective facts. And how we can move forward is part of the collective and cooperative work that we need to move forward together. Argentina shares the objective of moving ahead with the EU-Mercosur agreement and has worked in this sense during the exercise of our presidency. The strengthening of the bond between EU and Mercosur is a political signal that is necessary within an international context of conflict and growing uncertainty. The agreement also presents specific opportunities within the reconfiguration framework of productive maps, generation of new technologies, and employment that entail transformations in value chains. The agreement can be, in our opinion, an efficient vehicle for Mercosur to give more power to the participation of the global mapping reorder in production and employment. And it can also work as a framework to bring more investments in strategic sectors such as conventional and renewable energies, mining, food, services based on knowledge, among others. However, to materialize these opportunities and the agreement to be of good results for both parties, it's important to work and update the 2019 text. The EU-Mercosur agreement, as closed in 2019, reflects an uneven effort between uneven blocks, and it does not respond to the international current scenario. In terms of these asymmetries, the GDP of the EU is approximately 6 times larger than that of Mercosur. 25 of 27 countries in the EU have a human development index higher than any of the countries in our bloc. Regarding the uneven effort of the pre-closing of 2019, let me give you some facts. While Mercosur has tariffs for 95% of European exports of agriculture goods, the EU only 82% of its agriculture imports from Mercosur and to the most part of the other countries offers quotas or fixed preferences. For interest products of Mercosur, there's permanent quotas, such as beef, poultry, honey, rice, cheese, corn, ethanol. And some of these quotas back from 2019 are now out of date. And this means that current trade is above the quota. We trade above what was agreed back in 2019. That means that if that agreement would be enforced now, we would have to reduce what we're exporting right now. The criteria is not applied to the contrary. That is, industrial goods that are imported from the EU are not subject to any quota. Finally, while the agreement sets limits for export rights and other tariffs and grants concessions in terms of public procurement, the text has nothing to say as to subsidies to the agriculture of the EU. This means that the margin for public policies has been restricted for one bloc more than for the other. Finally, but at the core of our concerns, it's a presentation of new environmental complaints by the EU after almost 4 years in which the negotiating process was virtually stopped by different internal political differences in Europe and not Mercosur. Back in February this year, we received, 4 years later, a side letter related to environment. The European text presents a partial vision on the sustainable development, excessively focused on the environment, with very few points on economic and social development and the interaction between all these dimensions. The text on the environment presented by the EU poses new obligations in terms of climate change, deforestation, or biodiversity that go even beyond what was agreed by multilateral fora, but omits any reference to implementation means. Implementation means how will we implement all this? And this is key for developing countries to meet our environmental commitments. The key here is then not just sign or not to sign the agreement. That is a simplified media debate, but that has nothing to do with the relation between countries or blocs. The importance of the work we've been doing around this agreement is focused on finding the right language, the paths, and the means of work between us and the EU that will allow us to develop an integration between blocs that narrows the gaps, gives more production, employment, and new technologies on both sides of the ocean. The agreement can also be the key to find a working method with the EU that implies the acknowledgement of treating environmental matters within Mercosur, taking into account the reality and implications of the Green Pact that will be signed with or without the commercial trade between two blocs. To sum up, this agreement can become an opportunity to reset the unfairness of certain agreements and adjust it to the reality of the world that changed in a significant manner in this first 4 years since 2019, an opportunity to introduce mechanisms that can protect us from unilateral measures with or without an agreement, particularly in the environmental field, an opportunity to generate mechanisms that favor insertion of our companies in value chains between both regions, sustainable, fair, resilient, in strategic sectors such as electromobility, among others, able to reduce negative impacts to the environment, at the same time generate quality employment with technology basis. More specifically, and with the objective of making this opportunity a reality, in March we presented before our bloc a counter-offer to this European side letter on the environment. We've introduced changes, conditions, and limitations that we consider necessary for this proposal to make sense for all Mercosur. At the same time, Argentina put before the consideration of the partners 2 additional texts which content should be added to the agreement. The first one has to do with technical and financial cooperation which is key to contribute to the gradual restructuring and competitiveness of SMEs in Mercosur that operate in sectors that will be significantly affected with their competition with their European peers. The second text has to do with value chain, and it intends to establish a joint agenda between blocs for localization of productive investment, the technological and productive development, stimulus to decent work with rights and good salaries. This text puts emphasis on these opportunities. It updates the agreement to this current reality that is ever-changing after 4 years. The work with the EU on value chain also represents an opportunity for fostering insertion of women and diversities in the most dynamic sectors and most productive sectors of the economy, and as such, positively modify participation of all with independence of their gender identity in the workforce so that we can strengthen access of all families of Mercosur. Finally, I'd like to express that our Argentine commitment with international trade integration of the bloc is unequivocal and goes beyond the European Union. We believe in the importance of diversifying in the geographic perspective our foreign agenda and search for commercial partners that can increase our opportunities so that we can receive new productive investment flows. And that is why in this semester we closed bilaterally the negotiation for the strengthening of our trade preferences with Israel. We believe that the rest of the partners and associates can do the same and close in this way the negotiations as a bloc. We've also fostered the regional negotiations agenda, particularly with Central America, a region where Mercosur has a commercial presence that is below its opportunities and capacities. In this regard, we've moved ahead with the Dominican Republic and El Salvador, and hopefully in the near future with Honduras. Recently, and when the Minister of Cooperation of the United Arab Emirates to our country, we talked about the interest to move forward in negotiations with Mercosur. For Argentina, Mercosur becomes its production and development platform for the economic and social fields. It's also part of the structure from which we in Argentina can connect with the rest of the world because it is our main international insertion instrument. With this spirit, we've worked this semester during our presidency, and I'd like to thank again the work of all the teams headed by our foreign ministers present here today. At the end of this two-day event, we will hand over the presidency to Brazil. But we will be, however, ready for a constructive dialogue to continue moving forward in this integration process, running the presidency or supporting Brazil for the second semester.